It was the biggest offer of his life, $20 billion on the table from the very giant he set out to disrupt.
Dylan, kind of the Silicon Valley dream coming true here.
What we are seeing is really this confluence of creativity and productivity. We believe that the combination of Adobe and Figma is going to be one of these unique combinations.
Dylan Field had a choice: sell the company that redefined design or keep fighting the empire. But to understand how a college dropout with a drone idea ended up in a boardroom face-to-face with Adobe execs, we need to rewind back to a dorm room at Brown University. In 2012, Dylan Field was 19, bright, curious, bored of school. So he applied for a $100,000 Thiel Fellowship with an idea for a drone startup. And surprisingly, he won. But within months, the drone idea had flopped, as did the next few ideas: a meme generator, a 3D content tool, until one conversation with his friend, Evan Wallace, changed everything. Design software hadn't evolved in decades. It was slow, local, and lonely. Files were constantly emailed, versions lost, collaboration painful. But what if design lived in the browser? What if it worked like Google Docs? Their hypothesis was bold and laughable to most investors at the time. The browser wasn't fast enough for professional design tools. It wasn't built for real-time graphics. But Dylan and Evan believed the browser would catch up and they'd be the first ones waiting. So they locked themselves in an apartment, raised $3.9 million from Index Ventures, and they started building Figma without a single designer on the team. It would take them 4 years before they launched a real product. And when they did, they weren't just launching software, they were starting a war. Now, most startups launch with a bang, but Figma launched with a whisper.
Why are you whispering? I don't want it to hear and feel bad. Okay.
For 4 years, they stayed in stealth mode, perfecting the tech, testing with early users, and quietly building a movement. While Adobe dominated with Creative Suite, Figma was recruiting designers one at a time through early demos, community events, and even design battles like Pixel Pong. It wasn't marketing, it was infiltration. By the time Figma launched publicly in 2016, designers didn't need convincing, they were already waiting. But breaking in was only the beginning. The next challenge was staying alive in a market where Adobe owned everything design. And just when things started working, the world totally changed.
First US case has been detected.
There's confirmation the coronavirus has reached Australia.
China is urging its citizens not to travel abroad.
Suddenly, the thing that Figma had built for, remote collaboration, it became the global standard. Overnight, what was once a nice to have became a lifeline. While competitors scrambled to retrofit their tools for remote teams, Figma was already ready. The tool was seamless, web native, and real-time. With this success, the founders doubled down. They raised $50 million and launched their whiteboarding tool FigJam to expand beyond just designers, rapidly becoming a default tool in thousands of companies. Figma didn't just survive the pandemic, it exploded to the tune of $75 million in annual recurring revenue. But all that growth came with a new challenge. Figma had hundreds of thousands of users, and their systems were buckling under the weight. The product worked beautifully on the surface, but underneath, it was pure chaos. They were still relying on a single Amazon RDS instance to handle almost everything, which meant they had to rebuild the entire system. So they did what most fast-growing startups avoid at all costs. They hit pause and rebuilt from the bottom up. It was one of the most technically complex things Figma had ever done, and it almost killed the company, but it laid the foundation for infinite scale, and just in time, because the company wasn't just growing, it was becoming a true competitor of Adobe. But to do that, the company had to shift from being a startup to being an enterprise. So you see, in the beginning, Dylan Field was the sales team. Every big account, he's the one that closed it. But when your company doubles revenue year over year, you can't keep founders selling. So Dylan hired Kyle Parrish to do what few sales leaders are trusted to do: take the reins and scale the motion. At first, it was chaos. Each rep had their own process. Deals got lost in email threads, forecasting was guesswork, so they had to build discipline. They rolled out mutual action plans, mapping out every buyer journey, aligning stakeholders, removing friction. They turned handshakes into systems, gut feelings into predictable outcomes. And the result? Figma started closing 6- and 7-figure deals with Fortune 500 companies without Dylan ever picking up the phone. And just when they were hitting their stride, an announcement changed everything. Adobe was going to buy Figma for $20 billion. The design world imploded. Figma had grown so fast, so effectively, it had become Adobe's biggest threat. So the design giant did the only thing it could do, make an offer to buy. But the celebration didn't last long. Users worried Figma would lose its soul. Regulators stepped in and antitrust flags went up. And for over a year, the deal hung in limbo. Then it collapsed.
Figma and Adobe have reached a joint decision.
That deal is not going to happen.
Adobe terminating its $20 billion deal to acquire the design software maker Figma.
The $20 billion acquisition was dead. To most companies, that would be a setback. To Figma, it was fuel.
The entire period of the acquisition, we kept our foot on the gas. And that's why we're able to, 6 months afterwards, after it's broken off, have an event like this and announce a ton of stuff on stage at Config.
The company that started with a failed drone idea was now leading a design revolution. But what made it work wasn't just the product. It was the people, it was the systems, the philosophy. So let's talk about what Figma actually did right. Their playbook that you can use to build your own SaaS rocket ship. Starting with lesson 1. Break the rules early, especially the invisible ones. Most startups enter a space and try to compete. Figma didn't. They questioned the premise that design tools were built on. Everyone assumed professional design tools had to be desktop-based. Powerful, yes, but isolated, non-collaborative, expensive, and clunky. Dylan and Evan flipped the script. What if it lived in the browser? What if it was multiplayer by default? It wasn't just a technical bet, it was a category shift. If you're building in a crowded market, ask yourself this. What assumption has everyone made that no one has tested? Break that. And you're not just a startup, you're a movement. The second lesson is build community before you need customers. Figma didn't just launch a product, they launched into a waiting crowd. Before the product was even ready, Claire Butler, Figma's head of marketing, and the early team were out demoing to design leaders. They were gathering feedback, they were creating FOMO, building trust. They hosted events like Pixel Pong, created the Figma community, and empowered designers to share work and ideas openly. So by the time Figma hit public beta, people weren't just curious, they were invested. Community is not a nice to have, it's the growth engine you can't fake. Start building it before you ship. Build with them, not for them. The third lesson is expand your product sideways, not just up. A lot of SaaS companies get stuck in vertical growth. Bigger customers, more features, higher price points. Figma did that, but they also, at the right time, grew horizontally. Launching FigJam wasn't just a new feature, it was an entry point into non-design teams. It served product managers, engineers, and founders. That move massively increased Figma's total addressable market without diluting their brand. So ask yourself this, what adjacent problems are our users already solving in spreadsheets, sticky notes, or screenshots? That's your FigJam, or at least a place to start. Next, solve for today, but keep an eye on tomorrow. Early on, Figma didn't obsess over infrastructure. They focused on what mattered most, building something people loved, shipping fast, and getting real-world validation. They built just enough to serve today's needs and paid close attention to the indicators signaling tomorrow's problems. And by 2020, usage had exploded. CPU spikes, database strains, engineers patching things at all hours. That was the moment to act. Once they saw this, they didn't delay, but they didn't overbuild either. They made smart tactical investments at the right time when the opportunity cost of not doing it was greater than the cost of focus. You don't scale because you might grow. You scale because the signs are flashing and you can't afford not to. And finally, systematize sales before it gets chaotic. Founder-led sales are magic in the early days. Dylan closed the first big deals himself, but scaling requires a different muscle. Systems, processes, rules of engagement. Kyle Parrish brought in that muscle. Mutual action plans, repeatable playbooks, forecastable pipelines. They went from founder hustle to go-to-market machine. And you don't need 50 reps to start this. You need one repeatable process. Because growth isn't just about momentum, it's about predictability. Figma didn't just win because they had a bold idea. They won because they made bold decisions, early, often, and under pressure. If you're building something right now, take the risks that feel uncomfortable. Lay the groundwork systems as you need them, and don't forget your users aren't just customers, they're your collaborators. That's how you build something the giants want to buy. And if you're building SaaS and want to scale like Figma, head to getchief.com. We turn operational chaos into predictable growth machines. And if this video hit home, hit subscribe. We've got more stories just like it.